My best friend got dumped, so I'm sending him on vacation with your money. What happens when you promise your heartbroken best friend the trip of a lifetime, but forget to mention that thousands of strangers are funding it? Jake, 28, sat at his small apartment desk, scrolling through his phone with increasing concern. His best friend Marcus hadn't responded to any of his texts in 3 days, which was highly unusual. Marcus was the type to reply within minutes, often with a string of emojis and enthusiasm that could brighten anyone's day. But now, silence. Jake knew why, of course. Marcus had been dumped. Not just dumped, but devastatingly, soul-crushingly dumped after a 5-year relationship that everyone, including Jake, had assumed would end in marriage. The breakup had happened 2 weeks ago. Emma, Marcus's girlfriend since college, had walked out with a speech about growing apart and needing space. Marcus had taken it harder than Jake had ever seen anyone take anything. The first few days were filled with drunken phone calls, tearful voicemails, and Jake spending hours sitting with Marcus on his couch watching mindless television while Marcus stared blankly at the screen, occasionally muttering about how he couldn't believe Emma was really gone. Jake had tried everything to cheer up his friend. He'd organized movie nights, dragged Marcus to bars, even suggested they join a gym together. Nothing worked. Marcus remained a shell of his former self, the vibrant, outgoing man reduced to a depressed shadow who rarely left his apartment. Jake was growing desperate. He knew he had to do something big, something that would shake Marcus out of his funk and remind him that life was still worth living. That's when the idea struck Jake with the force of a lightning bolt. A trip. Not just any trip, but the epic adventure they'd always talked about but never taken. The cross-country road trip they'd been planning since college, the one that kept getting postponed for someday. Well, someday was now. Jake would take Marcus across America, from their small town in Ohio all the way to California, with stops at every weird roadside attraction and national park they'd ever dreamed of visiting. It would be the ultimate distraction, the perfect medicine for a broken heart. There was just one problem: money. Jake was a freelance graphic designer with inconsistent income, and Marcus had just quit his job as a teacher in a fit of post-breakup despair. Neither of them had the funds for such an ambitious journey. But Jake wasn't the type to let practicalities stand in the way of a good plan, especially when his best friend's happiness was at stake. As Jake sat at his desk, a wild idea began to form in his mind. What if he could get other people to pay for their trip? What if he turned their journey into something bigger than just 2 friends on the road? The gears started turning in Jake's mind, a plan beginning to take shape that was either brilliant or absolutely insane. He wasn't sure which, but he knew it was their only chance. Jake stood up from his desk and grabbed his jacket. It was time to check on Marcus, to see if his friend was even still alive in that apartment of his. And then, once he was sure Marcus was okay, Jake would present his plan. The plan that would change both of their lives forever in ways neither of them could possibly imagine. Jake found Marcus exactly where he expected to find him, sprawled on the couch in his darkened apartment, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and dirty dishes. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and regret. Marcus hadn't showered in days, his normally well-kept hair a greasy mess, his eyes red-rimmed and vacant. He barely acknowledged Jake's presence, just grunted when Jake entered and flopped down in the armchair opposite the couch. Jake took a deep breath. This was worse than he thought. Marcus wasn't just sad, he was spiraling, sinking deeper into a depression that threatened to swallow him whole. Jake knew he had to act fast before Marcus reached a point from which he couldn't be pulled back. "Marcus," Jake said, his voice gentle but firm, "I have an idea, something that might help." Marcus didn't respond, just continued to stare at the blank television screen. Jake pressed on, undeterred. He laid out his plan for the cross-country trip, describing the open road, the freedom, the adventure they would have together.
He painted a vivid picture of sunrises over the Grand Canyon, neon lights in Las Vegas, the vast expanse of the American landscape spread out before them. For the first time in days, Marcus showed a flicker of interest, his eyes moving from the television to Jake's face. "It's a great idea, man," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "But we can't afford it." This was the moment Jake had been waiting for. He leaned forward, excitement building in his chest as he revealed the second part of his plan, the part that was either genius or madness. "We're not paying for it," Jake said, a grin spreading across his face. "The internet is." Jake explained his concept. They would create a crowdfunding campaign, but not just any campaign. They would market it as a social experiment, a journey of healing and friendship that others could follow online. They would document everything, the planning, the packing, the road trip itself, creating content that people could engage with. In exchange for donations, backers would get access to exclusive content, postcards from the road, and the satisfaction of helping a heartbroken guy rediscover his joy. Marcus was skeptical at first, but as Jake spoke, he began to see the appeal. It wasn't just a free trip, it was a project, something to focus on besides his own misery. The idea of turning his pain into something that could entertain or inspire others was strangely compelling. That night, they worked together to create their crowdfunding page. They called it the Breakup Trip, one man's journey from heartbreak to happiness across America. They wrote an honest, vulnerable description of Marcus's situation and their plans for the trip. They set a goal of $10,000, which they calculated would be enough for gas, food, and cheap motels for a month-long journey. When they launched the campaign the next morning, Jake expected it would take weeks to reach their goal, if they reached it at all. He was prepared to promote it relentlessly, to shamelessly beg friends and family for donations. But what happened next was something neither of them could have predicted in their wildest dreams. Within 24 hours, their campaign had gone viral. A popular lifestyle blogger had shared it, calling it the most wholesome thing I've seen all year. People were drawn to the authenticity of their story, to the idea of helping a stranger heal from heartbreak. Donations poured in from all over the world, accompanied by messages of support and personal stories of breakups and healing. A week later, they had not only met their goal, but exceeded it by $5,000. The money was enough to upgrade their plans, to stay in better motels, to eat at decent restaurants instead of fast food chains. It was enough to turn their desperate plan into a truly comfortable journey. But with the money came something else: expectations. Their backers weren't just funding a trip, they were investing in a story. They wanted updates, content, proof that their money was making a difference. Jake and Marcus suddenly found themselves with thousands of virtual travel companions, all following their journey and waiting for the happy ending they'd been promised. As they stood in Marcus's living room, surrounded by suitcases and maps, the reality of what they'd gotten themselves into began to sink in. This was no longer just a trip to cheer up a heartbroken friend. It was a public performance, a journey that belonged as much to their backers as it did to them. And as they would soon discover, that would change everything. The first day of their journey dawned bright and clear, a perfect start to what would become an unforgettable adventure. Jake's old Subaru, packed to the brim with suitcases, snacks, and camera equipment, sat gleaming in the morning sun. Marcus, for the first time in weeks, looked genuinely excited. He'd showered, shaved, and even managed to smile as Jake handed him the keys. "You're driving first," Jake said, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "It's your healing journey after all." Marcus nodded, his eyes focused on the road ahead. The weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift slightly from his shoulders as he settled into the driver's seat. This was it, the beginning of something new. Their first destination was Chicago, a 6-hour drive from their Ohio hometown. As they hit the highway, the familiar landscapes of their childhood giving way to new territory, Marcus began to open up. He talked about Emma, but not with the raw pain of the past weeks. Instead, he reflected on their relationship with a newfound perspective, acknowledging the good times while recognizing the cracks that had been forming long before the breakup.
Jake listened, offering occasional comments but mostly letting Marcus talk. This was what he'd hoped for, that the open road would give Marcus the space he needed to process his emotions, to move beyond the initial shock and into a place of acceptance and growth. They arrived in Chicago late afternoon, checking into a downtown hotel that was far nicer than anything they would have booked on their own budget. The extra money from their crowdfunding campaign was already making a difference. After dropping their bags in their room, they set out to explore the city, cameras in hand to document their experiences for their growing online audience. That evening, sitting at a rooftop bar overlooking the city lights, they checked their crowdfunding page. The comments section had exploded with activity. People were invested in their journey, leaving messages of encouragement and asking questions about their plans. One comment stood out to Marcus. "I just went through a bad breakup too. Seeing you out there taking this trip gives me hope that I'll be okay too." Marcus read the comment aloud, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time, he truly understood the impact of what they were doing. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the people who saw themselves in his story, who were following along and finding their own healing in his journey. The next morning, they posted their first video update, a short clip of them driving into Chicago, set to an upbeat indie song. Within hours, it had thousands of views. Comments poured in, praising their honesty and rooting for Marcus's recovery. The attention was both overwhelming and exhilarating. As they left Chicago and headed west toward the Great Plains, the landscape began to change. The rolling hills of the Midwest gave way to flat, endless fields of corn and wheat. The sky seemed to expand, becoming bigger and more dramatic than anything they'd seen back home. Their next stop was a roadside attraction in Kansas, the world's largest ball of twine, a quirky tourist spot that perfectly captured the spirit of their journey. They took silly photos, filmed themselves adding to the ball with their own piece of twine, and posted it all online. Their followers loved it, sharing the photos and leaving comments about how much they wanted to take a similar trip. But as the novelty of the journey began to wear off and the reality of weeks on the road set in, cracks started to appear in their carefully curated story. Marcus's moods fluctuated wildly. One moment he would be laughing and enjoying the adventure. The next he would be silent and withdrawn, lost in thoughts of Emma and what might have been. Jake found himself struggling to balance his roles as friend, filmmaker, and social media manager. He was constantly thinking about content, about how to frame their experiences for their online audience. Sometimes he would catch himself viewing a moment not as an experience to be lived, but as material to be shared. It bothered him, but he pushed the discomfort aside, telling himself that this was the deal they'd made. This was the price of their free trip. As they drove through the vast emptiness of western Kansas, Marcus grew increasingly quiet. The landscape seemed to mirror his inner state, flat, monotonous, seemingly endless. Jake tried to engage him, pointing out interesting sights or asking about his thoughts, but Marcus remained withdrawn. That evening, as they checked into a motel in a small town that seemed to consist of little more than a gas station and a few dilapidated buildings, the tension between them finally came to a head. Marcus accused Jake of treating their journey like a performance, of being more concerned with their online image than with his actual well-being. Jake, defensive and exhausted, shot back that Marcus was being ungrateful, that he was forgetting that none of this would be possible without the crowdfunding campaign that Marcus had initially been so excited about. The argument escalated, words flying in the cramped motel room. For the first time since they'd started their journey, the cameras were off, the updates paused. This was real, raw, and ugly, the kind of authentic moment that neither of them wanted to share with their online followers.
As they finally fell into an uneasy silence, both wondering if they could continue the journey together, they had no idea that their biggest challenge was yet to come. A challenge that would test their friendship, their integrity, and the very foundation of the project that had brought them on this journey in the first place. The morning after their argument dawned gray and gloomy, matching the mood between Jake and Marcus. They packed their bags in silence, the air thick with unspoken resentment and hurt. The drive to their next destination, Denver, was strained, with neither man willing to break the tense quiet that had settled between them. As they navigated the increasingly mountainous terrain of Colorado, Jake couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come, not just in miles but in their relationship. He'd always considered Marcus his brother, the one person he could count on through thick and thin. But now, sitting in the passenger seat while Marcus drove with a grim expression, Jake wondered if their friendship would survive this journey. The problem, as Jake saw it, was that they had started this project with different expectations. Marcus had seen it as a way to heal, a private journey made possible by the generosity of strangers. Jake, on the other hand, had viewed it as an opportunity, a chance to create something meaningful that could resonate with people. Neither perspective was wrong, but the clash between them was creating a rift that seemed to widen with each passing day. They arrived in Denver late afternoon, checking into their hotel without discussion. As they stood in the lobby waiting for the elevator, Jake's phone buzzed with notifications. Their latest video, posted before their argument, had gone viral. The comment section was filled with supportive messages, people sharing their own breakup stories and thanking Marcus for being so vulnerable about his healing process. Jake showed the notifications to Marcus, hoping the positive response might lift his spirits. Marcus glanced at the phone, his expression unreadable, before turning away to collect his luggage. The rejection stung more than Jake cared to admit. That evening, Jake suggested they go out to explore Denver, to visit some of the breweries the city was famous for. Marcus declined, claiming he was tired. Jake went alone, wandering through the bustling streets, feeling increasingly isolated despite being surrounded by people. He posted photos of his solo adventure, carefully framing them to suggest that Marcus was resting back at the hotel, not avoiding him. When Jake returned to the hotel room, he found Marcus sitting on his bed, laptop open, scrolling through their crowdfunding page. The tension in the room was palpable. "We need to talk," Marcus said, closing his laptop and turning to face Jake. What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of their friendship. Marcus expressed his discomfort with how public their journey had become, how he felt like he was performing his grief rather than genuinely experiencing it. He admitted that he'd made a mistake in agreeing to the crowdfunding idea, that he wasn't cut out for this kind of vulnerability. Jake listened, his heart sinking as he realized how much he had misjudged the situation. He had been so focused on creating compelling content that he had lost sight of the original purpose of the trip, to help his friend heal. "I'm sorry," Jake said, the words feeling inadequate. "I got caught up in the idea of it, in the response we were getting. I forgot that this is supposed to be about you, about your healing." Marcus nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I know you didn't mean for it to be like this, but I can't do it anymore, Jake. I can't keep pretending to be okay for the camera when I'm not." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their conversation settling between them. The future of their journey hung in the balance, uncertain and fragile. Finally, Jake spoke. "What if we changed things? What if we stopped posting updates, stopped filming everything? We could use the money we've raised to continue the trip, but on our own terms. No more performing for an audience." Marcus considered this, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Would people be okay with that? They gave us money expecting to follow our journey. "They gave us money to help you heal," Jake corrected, "and if this isn't helping, then we need to change our approach." That night, they drafted a post explaining their decision to step back from social media, to continue their journey privately. They were honest about the pressure they'd been feeling, the way the public nature of their trip had affected their friendship. They promised to provide a final update when they returned home, sharing what they had learned from their experience. The response to their post was overwhelmingly supportive. People praised their honesty, their courage, and prioritizing their friendship over their online presence. Many backers commented that they didn't need regular updates, that they were just happy to have helped in some small way. With the weight of online expectations lifted, Jake and Marcus felt a renewed sense of freedom. The next morning, as they left Denver and headed toward Utah's national parks, the atmosphere between them had shifted. The tension was gone, replaced by a tentative but genuine sense of camaraderie. As they drove through the stunning landscapes of Arches and Canyonlands, Marcus began to open up again, sharing his thoughts and feelings without the pressure of knowing they would be broadcast to thousands of strangers. Jake, for his part, found himself seeing the journey through new eyes, appreciating the moments for what they were, not for how they would appear online.
They had weathered the storm, emerging with a stronger friendship and a clearer sense of purpose. But, as they would soon discover, their journey still held unexpected challenges, lessons that neither of them could have anticipated when they first set out on this adventure. The Utah desert stretched out before them, a vast expanse of red rock and endless sky. As they drove deeper into the heart of the national parks, Marcus and Jake found themselves falling into a comfortable rhythm, the ease of their renewed friendship a stark contrast to the tension of the previous days. Without the pressure to document every moment, they were free to simply experience the journey, to be present in a way that hadn't been possible when they were performing for an online audience. They hiked through narrow slot canyons, stood in awe before ancient rock formations, and watched in silence as the sun set over the desert landscape, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. In the evenings, they would sit outside their motel or campsite, talking long into the night. Marcus shared more about his relationship with Emma, not just the pain of the breakup, but the good times they had shared, the ways in which she had helped him grow as a person. Jake listened without judgment, offering support when needed, but mostly just being there, a steady presence in his friend's journey toward healing. One evening, as they sat around a small campfire, the desert sky above them filled with more stars than they had ever seen, Marcus turned to Jake with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder about all the people who donated to our trip?" he asked, poking at the fire with a stick. "Like, who are they? Why did they care so much about helping a stranger?" Jake considered this. "I think everyone sees a bit of themselves in your story, man. Breakups are universal. Everyone's been there or knows someone who has. I think people wanted to help because they know how much it hurts, and they wanted to be part of something positive." Marcus nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's pretty amazing when you think about it. All these people from all over the world contributing to my healing journey. It makes me feel less alone, you know?" This realization marked a turning point for Marcus. He began to see their journey not as a burden or a performance, but as a genuine opportunity for growth and connection. The knowledge that so many people were rooting for him, even from afar, gave him a sense of purpose that had been missing since the breakup. As they left Utah and headed toward the West Coast, their spirits were high. The journey was no longer just about Marcus healing from a breakup. It had become something more, a shared experience that was transforming both of them in unexpected ways. Their next destination was San Francisco, a city that had always fascinated them with its iconic landmarks and vibrant culture. As they drove across the Bay Bridge, the city skyline spread out before them. They felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. This was the final leg of their journey, the culmination of weeks on the road. They spent 3 days exploring San Francisco, riding cable cars, visiting Alcatraz, and walking across the Golden Gate Bridge. Marcus, who had always been interested in photography, spent hours capturing the city's unique character. His passion for the art reawakened after months of neglect. It was on their last day in San Francisco that everything changed. They were having coffee at a small cafe in the Mission District when Jake's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but something compelled him to answer.
The call was from a producer at a major television network who had seen their crowdfunding campaign and followed their journey online. She was interested in their story, in the unique way they had combined personal healing with community support. She wanted to fly them to Los Angeles for a meeting to discuss the possibility of turning their experience into a documentary series. Jake hung up the phone, his mind racing. This was incredible, the kind of opportunity that could change both of their lives. He turned to Marcus, excitement bubbling up inside him as he shared the news. But Marcus's reaction wasn't what Jake expected. Instead of sharing in Jake's excitement, Marcus grew quiet, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I don't know, man," he said finally. "I thought we agreed to step back from all that, to keep this journey private." "This is different," Jake argued. "This isn't about posting updates for strangers. This is about sharing our story in a meaningful way, potentially reaching even more people who might be going through similar experiences."
Marcus shook his head. "I just got comfortable with the idea of this being our journey, not a public spectacle. I'm not sure I'm ready to put myself back out there like that." The tension that had eased between them returned, thicker than before. They found themselves at a crossroads, faced with a decision that would determine the direction of their journey and, potentially, their futures. As they left San Francisco and headed south toward Los Angeles, the car was filled with a heavy silence. The beautiful California coastline passed by outside their windows, but neither man was in the mood to appreciate it. They were too caught up in their own thoughts, too uncertain about what the future held. When they finally arrived in Los Angeles, checking into a hotel near the television studio where they were scheduled to meet the next day, the tension between them was almost unbearable. They went their separate ways that evening, Jake to explore the city, Marcus to stay in his room and contemplate the decision that lay ahead. As Jake wandered through the streets of Hollywood, the glow of the city lights around him, he couldn't help but wonder if they had made a mistake. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe they should have kept their journey private, cherished it as a personal experience, rather than trying to turn it into something bigger. But then he thought about all the people who had supported them, the messages of gratitude and healing they had received. Wasn't there value in sharing their story, in potentially helping others through their experience? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Jake made his way back to the hotel, uncertain what the next day would bring. The morning of the meeting dawned bright and sunny, a perfect Los Angeles day that did nothing to ease the tension between Jake and Marcus. They had barely spoken the night before, each lost in their own thoughts about the decision that lay ahead. As they rode the elevator up to the television studio, Jake couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was the kind of opportunity he had always dreamed of, a chance to create something meaningful on a larger scale. But he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that he was pushing Marcus into something he wasn't comfortable with, prioritizing his own ambitions over his friend's well-being. The meeting itself was everything Jake had hoped for and more. The producer, a sharp, enthusiastic woman named Sarah, had clearly done her research. She understood their story, the delicate balance between personal healing and public sharing that they had been navigating. She presented a vision for a documentary series that was thoughtful and respectful, focusing not just on Marcus's journey, but on the broader themes of friendship, healing, and the power of community support. It wouldn't be about exploiting your story, Sarah explained, her eyes meeting both of theirs. It would be about sharing it in a way that could potentially help others. Breakups are something almost everyone goes through, but we rarely talk about the healing process in an honest way. Your journey offers a unique perspective on that. Jake found himself nodding along, impressed by Sarah's understanding. When he glanced at Marcus, however, he saw that his friend remained unconvinced, his expression guarded and uncertain. After the meeting, as they walked back to their car, Jake turned to Marcus, eager to discuss the opportunity. "What did you think? This could be amazing, man. A real chance to make a difference." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Jake. It all sounds great, but I can't shake the feeling that we're losing something by making this so public.
This journey was supposed to be about healing, about finding myself again after the breakup. It wasn't supposed to become a television show. But that's the thing, Jake argued, his frustration growing. It already became something more the moment we started the crowdfunding campaign. We invited people into our story, into your healing process. This is just the next step, a way to share that story with even more people. Marcus shook his head. There's a difference between accepting help from strangers and putting your entire emotional journey on display for entertainment. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. The argument escalated, words flying in the confined space of the car. All the tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface came rushing to the forefront. Years of friendship tested by the weight of their current situation. "I did this for you," Jake finally shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "I came up with this idea because I wanted to help you, to see you happy again. And all you've done is complain about it, about the attention, about everything. Maybe I should have just let you sit in your apartment and feel sorry for yourself." The words hung in the air, harsh and unforgivable. Jake immediately regretted them, but it was too late. The damage was done. Marcus stared at him, his expression hurt and betrayed. Without another word, he got out of the car and walked away, leaving Jake alone with his anger and regret. Jake sat in the car for a long time, the engine idling, the weight of his words pressing down on him. He had never spoken to Marcus like that before, never allowed his frustration to override his concern for his friend. But the pressure of the past few weeks, the constant balancing act between friendship and project, had taken its toll. When Jake finally returned to their hotel room, he found Marcus packing his bags. "I'm going home," Marcus said, not looking up from his suitcase. "This was a mistake. I thought a trip would help me move on, but all it's done is complicate things, put a strain on our friendship."
Jake watched, helpless, as Marcus continued to pack. He wanted to apologize, to take back his harsh words, but he couldn't find the right words to express the complex mix of emotions he was feeling. "You don't have to go," Jake finally said, his voice quiet. "We can figure this out." Marcus paused, his back still to Jake. "I don't think we can, man. Not right now. I need some space to figure things out on my own, without cameras or crowdfunding campaigns or television deals." With that, Marcus zipped up his suitcase and walked out of the room, leaving Jake alone with the remnants of their journey and the heavy silence of his own thoughts. As Jake sat on the edge of the bed, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Their journey, which had started with such promise, had ended in failure. He had lost sight of the original purpose, allowing the opportunity for recognition and success to cloud his judgment. In trying to help his friend, he had inadvertently driven him away. The question now was whether their friendship could be repaired, whether the damage done by this ill-fated journey could be undone. Jake didn't know the answer, but as he sat alone in the hotel room, he knew one thing for certain: he had to try. The flight back to Ohio was the longest of Jake's life. As he stared out the window at the clouds below, he couldn't help but replay the events of the past few weeks, searching for the moment where everything had gone wrong. Was it when they had launched the crowdfunding campaign? When they had decided to document their journey for an online audience? Or was it when he had allowed his own ambitions to overshadow his concern for his friend's well-being? By the time Jake landed in their hometown, he had come to a difficult realization. The problem wasn't the crowdfunding campaign or the possibility of a television show. The problem was him. He had lost sight of what was important, allowing the excitement of the project to overshadow the genuine connection he shared with Marcus. The first thing Jake did when he got home was write a post for their crowdfunding page. He was honest about what had happened, taking full responsibility for the way things had ended. He apologized to their backers for not completing the journey as promised, and, more importantly, he apologized to Marcus for putting pressure on him and losing sight of the original purpose of their trip.
"I started this journey with the best of intentions," Jake wrote. "I wanted to help my best friend heal from a devastating breakup. But somewhere along the way, I got caught up in the attention we were receiving, in the possibility of turning our experience into something bigger. I lost sight of what was truly important, Marcus's well-being and our friendship. For that, I am deeply sorry." The response to Jake's post was overwhelmingly supportive. People praised his honesty and vulnerability, many sharing their own experiences of letting ambition overshadow relationships. But Jake didn't care about the public response anymore. What mattered was making things right with Marcus. The next morning, Jake drove to Marcus's apartment, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. He didn't know if Marcus would even talk to him, but he had to try. To his relief, Marcus opened the door when he knocked. He looked tired, his eyes red-rimmed, but he didn't immediately close the door in Jake's face, which Jake took as a good sign. "Can we talk?" Jake asked, his voice quiet. Marcus nodded, stepping aside to let Jake in. They sat in the living room, the same room where Jake had first proposed the trip that had changed everything. "I'm sorry," Jake said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. "I let my own ambitions get in the way of our friendship. I was so excited about the possibility of creating something meaningful that I forgot that this was supposed to be about you, about your healing." Marcus listened, his expression unreadable. When Jake finished, there was a long silence before Marcus finally spoke. "I'm sorry too," he said. "I know you were trying to help, and I appreciate that, but I wasn't honest with myself about what I needed. I thought a big adventure would distract me from my pain, but what I really needed was time to process, to grieve the end of my relationship properly." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their shared experience hanging between them. But this time, the silence wasn't tense or uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding, with the recognition that they had both made mistakes, that they had both lost their way at times. "So what now?" Jake finally asked.
Marcus considered this for a moment. "I think I need some time to myself, to figure things out without any distractions. But I don't want to lose our friendship. You've been there for me through everything, and I don't want this to be the end of that." Jake nodded, relief washing over him. "Of course, take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here whenever you're ready." As Jake left Marcus's apartment that day, he felt a sense of closure that had been missing from their journey. The trip hadn't gone as planned, but perhaps that was okay. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys aren't the ones that take us far from home, but the ones that bring us back to ourselves. In the weeks that followed, Jake focused on refunding the remaining money from their crowdfunding campaign, keeping their backers updated on the situation. He also took some time for himself, reflecting on what he had learned from the experience about friendship, ambition, and the importance of staying true to one's values. Marcus, for his part, threw himself into his photography, using it as a way to process his emotions and rediscover his passion. He started a small business selling prints of his work online and found a new sense of purpose in the aftermath of his breakup. 3 months after their ill-fated journey, Marcus called Jake. They met for coffee at their favorite local spot, the same place where they had spent countless hours talking over the years. As they sat across from each other, sipping their drinks, it felt like old times. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, a smile playing on his lips, "about that trip, about what you were trying to do for me." Jake waited, curious about where this was going. "I was wrong to dismiss the idea so completely," Marcus continued. "I think there is value in sharing our story, in showing people that healing is possible, even when it feels impossible. But I want to do it on our own terms, in a way that feels authentic to both of us." Jake's eyes lit up with understanding. "What do you have in mind?"
Marcus pulled out his laptop, showing Jake a website he had been working on. It was a blog, a space where they could share their story and the lessons they had learned, along with Marcus's photography and Jake's design work. There was no crowdfunding, no television deals, no pressure to perform for an audience. Just two friends sharing their journey in their own way. As Jake looked at the website, a genuine smile spread across his face. This was it, the perfect blend of his desire to create something meaningful and Marcus's need for authenticity and privacy. "I love it," Jake said, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "Let's do it." And so they did. Over the next few months, they built their website, sharing not just the story of their journey, but the broader lessons they had learned about friendship, healing, and the importance of staying true to oneself. Their site gained a modest but dedicated following, people who appreciated their honest approach and the genuine care that came through in their writing. A year after their initial journey, Jake and Marcus took another trip, this time a short weekend getaway to a nearby state park. There were no cameras, no crowdfunding campaigns, no expectations from an online audience. Just two friends enjoying each other's company and the beauty of the natural world around them. As they sat by a campfire on their last night, watching the flames dance in the darkness, Marcus turned to Jake with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "that trip we took last year, as disastrous as it was in some ways, was probably the best thing that could have happened to me." Jake looked at him, surprised. "How so?" "It forced me to confront my pain, to really deal with the breakup, instead of just distracting myself from it. And it reminded me of what's truly important, not the attention or the opportunities, but the genuine connections we have with people who care about us." Jake nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I learned something too. I learned that sometimes the most meaningful projects aren't the ones that bring us fame or recognition, but the ones that allow us to connect with others in a genuine way, to share our experiences and perhaps help someone else in the process." As they sat in comfortable silence, the stars twinkling above them, Jake and Marcus both knew that their journey wasn't really over. It had just evolved, transforming from a cross-country road trip into something more enduring. A friendship strengthened by adversity, a shared commitment to authenticity, and a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful adventures are the ones that bring us back to ourselves and to each other.